So this is one of those moments where you reflect. I graduated from MIT in 1994 with a mechanical engineering degree that I've never used in my life. It makes my parents very happy. Then this whole internet thing happened. I moved back to Boston. I helped start a bunch of internet companies, the last 4 of which I have sold to different companies. And I love this sort of concept. The Al Gore inventing the internet joke is one of the most old, tired jokes in the world, but we can say Al invented 2 things, one good, one bad. He invented the internet, which is good for us, and then he invented global warming, which has been bad for us. It's a funny joke, guys. Come on. You can always tell a lot about the political crowd of the political environment of the crowd by whether they laugh at that joke. I spoke at the National Pest Association, Exterminators Association. I got a standing O when I told that joke. So anyway, so then this whole idea of data came out in the world of sports, the whole concept of Moneyball. And I realized, like, maybe I could go work one day in sports. I started a company called Citizen Sports and Pro Trade that we sold to Yahoo. And most recently, this company, 10Xer, that I started was all around trying to use data and analytics to predict human behavior, to actually look at your own employees and see who was good and who was bad and who was struggling. And so I did that for a while, and then that company we sold to Twitter, and now I work for Twitter. But during this whole time, I was a professional card counter. Okay? I was a professional blackjack player from 1994 to 2001. So what does that mean? So quickly, I'm going to take you through some of the lessons that you can learn from card counting. The first is to favor data over gut. Okay, so basic strategy, which we describe, which is what you do at any hand of the blackjack table. There's this matrix that shows you what your card is and what the dealer's up card is, and based on this matrix, you know what to do at the table. It's been simulated out 1,000,000 times. There is only one right decision. If you have a pair of 9s and the dealer has a 7, there is only one right decision. And the average blackjack player loses about 3% of the money they put on the table. Okay? If you play basic strategy perfectly, you're only going to lose about 0.5% of the dollars you put on the table. But a lot of people don't play basic strategy. And it's very odd, but it actually is very interesting because it highlights some emotional biases that we all have. And the first one is this idea of omission bias. Okay, so imagine that you have 15 and the dealer has a 9 up. What should you do in that situation? You should hit. You should take a card. But if you get a 7, an 8, a 9, a 10, a jack, a queen, a king, you're going to lose right away. So a lot of people in that situation, even though they know it's the right thing to do, they'll favor inactivity over activity. They'll hope that they can stand, and maybe the dealer will have to take a card, and maybe the dealer will bust. But that's the wrong decision. And for a long time, in my life, I looked at this as like I didn't understand why people did it, and I kind of like had this idea of omission bias and how important it was to not favor inactivity or activity. And when I wrote a book called The House Advantage, Playing the Odds to Win Big in Business, and it's all about, I can stop for a second, it's available on Amazon if anyone wants to order it. But this book that I wrote, the reason I wrote it is I wanted to write a mainstream book about data and analytics that people who didn't care about this stuff would read. And so when I was promoting the book, I wanted to be on mainstream media. So the first place that I went was this show called Good Morning America. I'm sure all you guys are familiar with it. And the producer from Good Morning America calls me. She said, Jeff, this is great stuff. I love your story, but we're not a business show. So we need an example of how this stuff can help someone in everyday life. Do you have an example of that? And at that time, I didn't. But that all changed a few months later. I was speaking at a conference in Lake Tahoe, and I was driving back to San Francisco, and I was about to go do a 10-city speaking tour in Asia. And as I'm driving home, my phone rings, and it's my dad. My parents lived at that time on the East Coast. And he says, son, I have bad news. I said, well, what is it? He says, well, your mom has suffered a stroke. And I said, okay, is it bad? And he said, yeah, it's pretty bad. So I canceled my Asia trip, flew home to Boston, went in and saw my mom, and my dad was indeed correct. My mom's stroke was bad. She could not move the entire right side of her body, could not speak, and could not acknowledge me when I walked in. And as my sisters came home, when we sat down with the neurosurgeon said, I want to go over your options with you. And we said, well, what are our options? And he said, well, normally, a woman in this condition, over 70, who's just suffered a big brain trauma, we'd like to do nothing. And I'm being a data-driven person. I asked him, well, okay, if you do that, what are her chances to survive? And he said, well, her chances to survive past 60 days are about 22%. I said, I don't really like those numbers. Is there another option? He said, well, there's a riskier option that I actually think it's the right option. He said, we should go proactively as soon as we can and suck the blood clot out and proactively operate on her. And I said, okay, what are her chances of survival? He said, well, they're much better, but it's risky because we could really do something to her. She'd be on the ventilator. We could damage her brain more. And as he's saying this, these visions of hitting 15 versus 9 are going through my head. And I start standing up. I'm like, if we think this is right too, it's just like hitting 15 versus 9. And I start going on. And my sisters and my dad are like, this blackjack shit has gone to his head. But as I say this whole thing, they look at me and they understand that I'm right. And so we go and we tell the neurosurgeon to operate. And the neurosurgeon operates. And the next day my mother starts to perk up. 2 days later she starts to perk up enough that I felt comfortable leaving. And as I was leaving, I was getting married 9 months later. I said to her, I said, Mom, I just want to make sure that you and I can dance at my wedding. And she said, oh, that'll be no problem. And I'm proud to say that 9 months later, my mom and I did dance at my wedding. And I'm proud to say that, you know, this is all about 4.5 years ago, and she just moved out to California and is leading a pretty normal life. She has trouble saying what she wants to say, but as you can see, that kind of runs in the family. But that idea of making that difficult decision, I owe a lot to the lessons I learned from Blackjack. This idea that if you're going to make a decision, it may be a risky decision, but you have to make the right decision.